I would say I'm a pretty secure person, but I've been in a relationship before in the past where the person I was with, maybe I would categorize them as like avoidant, very aloof, very non-committal. And that really made me anxious. Like I feel secure, but if I want to be with someone and they're back and forth of like, well, we hang out, but I don't really want to commit. And then I'm going to not show up for you. They're not going to, oh my God. Hello, everybody. This is Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it. My name is Lindsay Murray.
And I'm Denise Stratton.
And today we are talking about attachment theory and what the hell does that have to do with sex? So we are going to get into it. For y'all to know, I chose this topic and I work a lot with attachment theory at work. And Denise, you do not have the job that I have. And so I know when I brought this subject to your attention, it was like, what? And so I'm really curious to hear from you. Like, what did you think about this topic? And I just want to know what you found.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, guys, but I did not expect to do self-reflecting for this one as well, and I did. It was definitely one of those, as I was going through each attachment style, I was like, oh, that's me, and then I would go, oh, wait, no, that one's me, and then I would get to like the last one, and I guess I'm all attachment styles, but no, I've tailored it. But anyway, I got this source from a YouTube therapist called Katie Morden. So thank you, Katie. I appreciate it.
Cool.
I learned a lot from your video. Attachment theory defined was first introduced by John Bowlby. But yeah, it's basically the way we bond with our primary caregiver is also the way we attach people throughout our lives. So it's pretty much just that synopsis. So for those of you who are very math-minded like me, just this equation, early relationships equals the blueprint for future ones.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we go through the attachment styles. So there's 4: secure attachment, insecure ambivalent attachment, insecure avoidant attachment. And I've also seen these listed as different things.
Yeah.
So,
do you want me to give you,
yes,
I'll share with you like how I categorize them because, okay. Right, like for anyone listening, when you look this up, you will see them called different things. And there's also like childhood attachment and there's adult attachment. And so they're similar, but they're not always labeled the same. So just for like the context of this episode, we're talking about adult attachment, which is what you were getting into. But I really categorize it as there are 4 different types. There's secure, and then there's 3 different types of insecure attachments. So if you're thinking about secure, insecure, the insecure umbrella has 3 underneath it. And so the insecure ones are all anxiety based. And so you have anxious ambivalent, which is like really what you would call anxious attachment, but the ambivalence is like a lot of mixed feelings in there. Okay. And then you have anxious avoidant. So if someone is avoidant and they avoid vulnerability and commitment and things like that, anxious avoidant, or it is called avoidant. And then you have anxious disorganized, which is really like fearful. And it's a mix of the other 2 anxious types or the other 2 insecure types. So anxious disorganized is a mix of high anxiety and also high avoidance. That's how I categorize them.
So yeah, and then for the 4 to just go into real quick, because I'm assuming Lindsay's going to go more thoroughly than me. But for the secure attachment, it basically happens when the primary caregiver is responsible to our needs. We have a very secure place. We're able to wander. We're able to explore the world because we know that when things get scary, we have a safe place to turn to.
Yeah.
Secure attachment is basically saying that I am trustworthy, that the other person is trustworthy, and that this bond that we have is trustworthy, right? Insecure ambivalent is what happens when a caregiver is inconsistent, whether it be for an illness of some sort or whether, they're just maybe they have other priorities that they have to also attain to, right? And this is when basically the person develops a thought that the other person isn't 100%, like they're not 100% sure that person will always be there, right?
Yeah, there's an inconsistency, right? Their caregiver is there for them sometimes, but not there for them at other times, and that's kind of where that's why they call this one anxious ambivalent, because the ambivalence is like, are they going to be there for me or not this time? What can I expect? What can I ask for? What emotion can I show? Like, it's just hard to say, right? And so that can create a lot of anxiety, the inconsistency for sure.
And because of that, resulting for that, that person tends to cling. They panic when there's separation because they know that they're not sure that the person is going to come back.
Yeah.
Right? That person develops a sense of securities just around themselves. Right. And then insecure avoidant attachment. Now, just to be completely frank and transparent about this, all of these I started realizing were just I do have these attachment styles, pretty much almost all of them, but it's very fluid depending on parts of my life, right?
Yeah.
So there were times with certain partners that I was insecure ambivalent, but then there were times, specifically we're about to go through insecure avoidant in my 20s when I was, very independent and very, I didn't want relationships or anything like that. So the insecure avoidant attachment is basically when the caregiver does not respond to the needs with sensitivity or care. That person tends to learn that they're alone in all of their upsets and all of their needs. They also learn that they're better in navigating their needs and emotions completely on their own. So that person tends to learn that they're trustworthy, right? But no one else is. So the attachment in general is not helpful for them, which can lead to basically isolation and a kind of a toxic independence, which is a term I've never heard of before. Because I've always... my mom raised an independent woman, right? We don't need no man or anything like that. So I've always thought of independence as a trait that was sought out for, that it was desired. It was something to look up to, someone who's really independent.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to see some reasons why it's not always like that. And then the last one, which I identified with a lot, was disorganized attachment. So basically, the way that Katie put it to me is basically the other three attachment styles have some type of like a default programming. Like this is like their defense mechanism. They have that defense mechanism that is set and ready. Whereas the disorganized attachment is basically either situational or it can change depending, right? So this happens when there's abuse or neglect in the relationship, right? Or let's say the caregiver is manipulative in some sort way. So the person being cared for starts to learn that like they're confused. Like they don't know whether to move towards their caregiver or away from their caregiver. It can play out in different ways. Like they can be clingy in one moment, but distant and rejecting in another. Those who have the disorganized attachment style have a hard time trusting others and also have a hard time trusting themselves too.
Yeah.
They might long for attachment, but also fear it. Basically, it's like it took the kitchen sink of the other attachment styles, right? Is what it felt like.
Yeah, and that's definitely why it's called disorganized, right? Because you don't always like know what is the coping mechanism going to be, right? Like of someone that has that kind of attachment style, it's really unpredictable, right? And like when I think of and here in a second I'm going to kind of talk about like the fluidity of like what attachment style we fell into and kind of like how it came to be that John Bowlby like made these categories. But as far as like disorganized attachment goes, the example that always makes a lot of sense to me is, let's say you're a kid and you make a joke and your caregiver like laughs at it because they think it's funny. And so in a kid's mind, it's like, I got a good response. I thought it was funny. I'm going to keep doing that. So they come back to the table. They say the same joke a few days later, and the caregiver gets angry about it and like hits them in the face or something. That is really confusing for anyone, but especially for a kid. So now the kid is like, I did the exact same thing and I got such a different response that the next time I'm around this caregiver, well, how am I going to act? Because I don't really know like what kind of response I'm going to get. And usually there is a lot of like trauma involved in that. Whereas, with like anxious type, there is an inconsistency, but it's not so much, it's not necessarily like trauma. It's just, is my parent going to be there for me or not? I don't really know. And that scares me and that makes me anxious. The disorganized is very like, no matter what I do, I risk really getting hurt, And so that's really scary.
Then I can see why I wouldn't trust myself, because it seems like no matter what I do,
no matter what I do, it's not going to be the right thing. It's not going to be good enough. I'm going to get punished. So yeah, scary.
Yeah, and I'll throw up a graphic for the people who are on video here, because if you are like me, very logical minded, and you like to see graphs and flowcharts and things like that, this graphic helped me a lot. When someone explained the trust self, trust others, it didn't make sense, but then they put this on a chart for me, and my math
and
mind
it helps.
was like, yes, that's right. So yeah, I'll put that up there. But yeah, going into a little bit more of the attachment styles, I guess what.
Yeah, I have a few things to add. I mean, first I want to just say that going to the attachments like being fluid, there are some criticism of John Bowlby's like attachment theory, rightfully so, and I'll get into those. But one of them, I think John Bowlby was certain that attachment styles like stay consistent throughout your whole life. I would disagree. I think attachment styles can change, and honestly, as a therapist, that's like, I feel like that's such a huge part of my work anyways, is if someone, let's say, is anxiously attached and they don't want to be, and they want to work on that, and they want to feel less anxious, and they want to feel more calm, they want to have better emotional regulation, I think you can work on those things and you can grow into a more secure person. But with that being said, it also depends on like where you are at in life, right? Like I would say I'm a pretty secure person, but I've been in a relationship before in the past where the person I was with, maybe I would categorize them as like avoidant, very aloof, very non-committal. And that really made me anxious. Like I feel secure, but if I want to be with someone and they're back and forth of like, well, we hang out, but I don't really want to commit. And then I'm going to not show up for you. Then I'm not going to, oh my God, like it just made me so anxious, right? So I've definitely been the anxious person before. I've been the disorganized person before. So I think it can change. And something else I want to say in that regard is that for anyone listening, if you're in a relationship or you want to be in a relationship, I do not think you need to be securely attached in order to have a good relationship. You could fall in any of these categories and still have a good relationship. You are worthy of love. I think like people really push attachment of like the ultimate goal is to always be secure. I just don't think that's a realistic expectation. And like the example I give is like, I don't know, if Andrew wanted to divorce me tomorrow, do you think I'm really going to be that secure of a person over the next year? Like, because I promise you, I'm not going to be. I would be devastated. I would be heartbroken. I would be a mess. I would probably be like really needy with my friends. Like I would need my whole community to like lift me up. Right.
Oh, yeah,
and so anytime we're talking about this, like you kind of use the word like toxic individualism or
toxic independence.
Independence. Yeah. Toxic independence. I've not heard of that exact term either, but I think the toxic part is right because I think people mix up security with toxic independence of like, you should always just be okay. That's what security is. That to me is not what security is. Security to me is like owning what you feel and being able to regulate and being able to ask for what you need and being able to tell your friends and family that you need them. You cannot be okay, but still have like some confidence that you have people to lean on. And I think it's the same in a relationship. Like, for example, if I'm more of the anxious partner, I can work on myself, but I can also like co-regulate with my partner. And if they know that I'm anxious and I have some insecurities, what's wrong with enjoying their validation? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I think there's levels to all of it. I think if your only self-worth is from someone else, that would be a bad spot to be in. I would work on that. But it's also okay if you're with your partner and it's like, well, yeah, I feel better when you tell me that you love me and that I look great and that you love my company. Like those things are all going to make me feel so good. And so like that sense of like community, I think is really important. I just have to like stress that, right? When we're talking about secure attachment, it doesn't mean that like you have to be totally fine on your own.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's where I brought up the avoidant attachment, because avoidant attachment is kind of something that I always looked up to when I was growing up and I was a little kid and things like that. As I always pictured myself as someone who didn't need anyone, I would be fine, never gonna get married. It's just not in it's not in the plan for me. So yeah, I would seek after those behaviors and I would try to replicate those behaviors of not needing anyone, but I was never happy in when I was in that section of my life. It was fun being independent and that aspect is great, and I do admire people who are independent. I do think that is a very admirable quality, but there is a point where one of my partners actually put it plainly to me, where she basically called me out one time because I was beating up myself because, you know, if it's either I do it or it doesn't get done right or whatever.
Yeah.
And she was like, you make it seem like no one can help you out. Like you never, you make it seem like it's a weakness for you if you got help. And I remember that clicked really fast. I was like,
yeah.
oh, okay, maybe this isn't the right behavior.
That's me too. I still go through that sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I'll take on way too much. It's almost like I don't want to burden anyone, or it's like embarrassing to ask for help. So I'll just like get through it all. And then of course I have great people in my life who are like, why didn't you just call me? I would have taken that for like, you know, like I still go through that now. And it's definitely childhood stuff, right? Like, I won't speak to your childhood, but for mine, I was definitely made to feel like a burden all the time. It was like a constant theme in my life. And so it's just funny how that manifests into like my job and my relationship with friends and my relationship with Andrew. Like, it's hard for me. I have to like really slow down to be like, you can say no to stuff, you know, or you can just ask for help too, or it's really, really hard to do. And so like all this attachment stuff. So John Bowlby, by the way, for anyone listening, he was a British psychologist and psychiatrist. I didn't know he was a psychiatrist. I knew he was a psychologist. So
for the ignorant ones, what's the difference?
A psychiatrist goes to medical school.
Okay.
So they can prescribe medication. A psychologist gets their PhD or PsyD, but they don't go to medical school. They can't prescribe medication.
So is psychiatry like a level up from like they
I mean, they're both technically doctors. Okay. So it's not really like a level up. It's just a different kind of doctor. Gotcha. Right? And so like psychiatrists, they go like, you know, a long time ago, psychiatrists would do both. Like it was more common for them to do both therapy and prescribing medications. Nowadays, those two things seem to be very separated. Like one provider will do therapy and then psychiatrists primarily do medication management. They have the counseling skills to be able to like assess and diagnose and like see what mental illness is there, and then they can prescribe medication, but they don't really do a lot of therapy anymore. A therapy provider is going to be separate, either psychologist or PsyD is like equivalent to psychologist or a master's level clinician.
So quick side tangent question. What's the difference between a psychologist and a therapist? Are they the same?
Well, they're the same, but a psychologist is a higher level of education. Like me, I'm master's level. So I went to like college, I got my bachelor's, got my master's degree. A psychologist has their PhD or a PsyD, right? So it's like a level up. They can provide therapy just like a master's level clinician can, but like when you get your PhD, you have more options. You can do like psychological evaluations and assessments, which I don't do as a master's level clinician, and you can also teach and you can also go into research. So like for me, I don't teach, but like if I were, like let's say I taught at a college, I would only be able to teach undergrad level because I'm only master's level. So you teach whatever is like below. But if you're if you're like PhD or PsyD level, you can teach at any level, right? Okay. And they tend to teach like master's level courses in graduate school and stuff like that. So they can do the same things to a degree, but like that higher level of education gets you more options. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So John Bowlby, the way that he I guess like the experiments he did to come up with attachment theory was he would have like a mother and child come in to his office or whatever like place he used for this experiment. That's another critique of him, is that he was very heavy on like the mother being the caregiver. Yeah, but like we know like that's not the only way to have a caregiver. But for the sake of like what he did at the time, he would have a mother and child come in. And he would have them go into a room together, and then he would have the mother leave. And the information he was really looking for is what the child would do when the mother would come back in the room. So, like, mother would leave. Like, let's say a child, they determine this child is securely attached. When their mother leaves the room, the securely attached child is probably still going to cry because they miss their mom. But when their mom returns, they go to their mom, they stop crying, they hug them, they calm down, they keep playing. Because that kind of represents security, meaning my mom is a trustworthy person. Mm-hmm. As soon as I see her, I know I'm okay. Oh, right? Okay, yeah. So I'm good. I can run to her. Whereas like an anxious, ambivalent child, their mother leaves, They begin crying. Their mother comes back. They keep crying. Even if they go to their mom, they're still crying, like can't get them to calm down. It's because their mom, like they know their mother is their caregiver, but there's like a lack of trust there, right? It's like, I want to go to you because you're my source of security, but you're not always there for me. So even though you're back in the room now, how do I know you're not going to leave again and then like never come back, whatever? So they like keep crying. So that's an indication of, okay, they're more anxious, right? And then, for example, like an avoidant child, their mother might leave. They might not really have much of a reaction. And then when their mother comes back in, they don't go to their mother at all. They like keep playing, doing whatever. So there's not really that bond there, right?
Yeah,
and then the disorganized could go
just
either anxious or avoid. And it could be, kind of a mix. And so that was like that's how all that like came to be.
Okay. I could see that. Yeah, I have a couple different like the signs that if you are in a healthy, secure, insecure thing. So tell me if these kind of align with your education.
Okay.
So for the signs of a healthy attachment, basically thinks our view is trustworthy and our partner's view is also trustworthy. And obviously I'm speaking to adult relationships now. They also have a sense of their own self-worth. So they're secure in who they are, right? They also take responsibility for their own mistakes and weaknesses. This automatically ruled out most of the people I know. In general, I was like, okay, we were there, but no, all right. So secure attachment. Their ability to express their needs and seek help if we need it. Again, something I struggle with, so I can completely understand. Capable of navigating hard things and capable of navigating things like conflict. Also admire you. People who have a secure attachment, they also view others as they are also capable of being trustworthy, and they also have these mindsets as well. They're able to navigate, all the things I listed before. When they make mistakes, they also know how to do conflict resolution as well. So that's they trust others are capable, basically. And then when others do make mistakes, that they aren't shattered in any way.
Yeah.
Or there's no overly idealistic way to look at things.
Yeah.
And they are able to, well, I guess I have it twice, but yeah, they're able to manage conflict pretty well. So
yeah, that's really accurate. That's a really accurate description. And I like how that's put because again, like I was saying earlier, I think people genuinely think that security means like I'm always okay. I would more so describe it that someone who is securely attached is confident in knowing that they're going to eventually be okay. If things go wrong, someone hurts them, someone makes a mistake, someone lets them down, they make a mistake, whatever. If they're in a phase or like they're not okay, there is this confidence of like, but I'm going to be okay, right? Like I can get through the conflict. I can express my emotions. I can lean on I know who I can rely on, because anytime we're talking about trust is an engagement with the unknown. It's a choice. You'll hear people say, well, how do I know I can trust someone? I'm like, you never really know. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you never really know because you can never give that full guarantee. So it is just a trust. It's a choice, right? And so if I choose to trust you, I also know that I'm going to be okay if you prove to me that I can't trust you, right? Yeah. I'm going to be okay and I'm not going to blame myself. I'm not going to lash out necessarily. I can get through this essentially.
What was really interesting about this research that I was seeing was I've never seen signs of healthy attachment which is again really interesting because we're talking about relationships here, until I was really starting to get into the polyamorous community. That's the first time I actually saw a lot of these signs actually played out well, and which makes sense now that we're talking about it, because like you said, trust is something that you kind of have to choose. And in the polyamorous community, trust and communication above anything else, communication and honest communication is the most important factor in order to be successful in doing a polyamorous relationship. Because like you said, you have to be okay with, if my partner doesn't want me in this facet and they want someone else, you have to be okay that we're gonna be okay, I'm gonna be okay. So those are definitely mental things that you have to think of whenever you decide to dive into that lifestyle, which I thought was an
Totally.
interesting
Yeah.
example.
When poly is done the right, I hate to say the right way. I don't mean like there's one way, but and if it's done effectively, that's a better word. When it's done effectively,
because there is an ineffective way to do poly. For sure.
Totally. And just like there is with monogamy, that's something that kills me is like, I think people have this conception of like poly or open is, oh, it's just too messy. And it's just, you know, destined for drama. And I'm like, do you know how many monogamous relationships are filled with drama and messiness? So there's so many, like, it's the same. It's really no different. It does require more communication because there's more people involved, right? But if they're really good at it, the honest communication is the piece, right? Like I have had clients that, and again, I know I'm like stressing this point, but they really think that security means like, any negative emotion I have, I need to get over it. Like I need to just be okay. And never express that thing because security means like always happiness. And I'm like, that's just unrealistic though. No. The honest communication is like, no, you did upset me. Yes. And this is a boundary I have. And I don't know if I can continue this. And this is going to have to go a different way for me. Like there's these honest conversations. That to me is so secure. Security doesn't mean I'm always happy and whatever. That would just be who is, right? That's unrealistic. But the honest communication is the key. And I think poly people are really good at that because you have to be, because if you let something go on too long, it's going to create some messiness, right? Yeah. If you're not being honest.
Yeah. And there is those parallels to avoidant attachment and the security. And this is where this thinking back on my past and my personal experience, when I was going into poly, I was in the avoidant attachment. That was me at that time in my life. And I remember thinking, and this is where the difference between the two is a little bit more apparent, is I always thought that going into poly, I was like, oh, okay, well, jealousy is just an emotion. It's not useful. There's no reason for it. I don't need it. I'm not going to feel it, right? And it was one of those things where I went into it thinking, well, I just don't feel, if I don't allow myself to feel jealousy, I'll be fine, right? Again, we're talking now avoidant attachment at this point, where I just tried not to get close enough to where I would care, right? Whereas what poly did teach me was it's okay to be jealous. Like people who are polyamorous are jealous all the time. It's totally fine to feel it. You just actually have to you have to be honest with yourself. Yeah. That this is the emotion that you're feeling. And then you have to talk about it and communicate.
You have to talk about it and work through it. Is this something you can work through on your own? If it's not, then you need to bring, there's always like something to it. And it's so funny you mentioned that because I've had clients that, are in open relationships. And so for anyone listening, like open is different than poly. Open is sexual partners, but poly is like relationships, right? Boyfriends, girlfriends, however you want to label it.
Love.
Yeah, it's love, right? So there's like those loving emotions involved. But I've had clients in open relationships who, when you're having sex with someone, you might develop feelings. And I have had clients say like, oh, if feelings are involved, I'll just cut it off. And I'm like, no, you won't. No, you won't. Because that's not how it works with people. No. Like most people are good people. Even if like feelings start developing and that's too much for you, that ends up not being what you want. Like, are you really just going to cut it off? I highly doubt it because we don't really do that with people who we start developing feelings for, right? And so you might have to, you're just trying to evaluate, like if you're honest with yourself, you can evaluate along the way what you really want to do, but don't make that false promise of like, oh, I'll just cut it off. And I'm like, oh, that's a disaster waiting to happen. Because if it does happen, that's probably not what you're going to do. So you got to be, even with that, you got to be honest about what might that mean, right? So,
So for the other one, so that was secure attachment. I also have a couple signs for insecure attachment. So if you think you might be you might fall into the insecure attachment or fearful attachment. I also saw, or anxious attachment. I saw the many different phrases. These are some signs that you could look out for. Is basically the view is you're not okay on your own. Right. So you lack self-esteem or you cling to others. Right. You could also lack a secure sense of self. So basically saying that, you're not sure if you're lovable or if you're good enough. So it basically means that you can push people away in order to protect yourself from abandonment. And you also view people that like if they pick you is when you find yourself having worth, right? So if they want me, that's when I am worth wanting. You can also long for attachment, but you can also struggle with boundaries in this. And because again, you're clingy, you're really anxious, you're afraid that they're gonna leave you at any time, and then this can also make you fearful of any type of conflict because you don't want to make the relationship unstable, you don't want to cause any drama, because you don't want the relationship. That's the most fearful thing, is you don't want the relationship to end.
Yeah.
So yeah, is that about?
Yeah, totally. I think that's a pretty good summary because you have the disorganized type, disorganized or fearful. Again, it's like the way I kind of describe it, and I might be repeating something you just said, but the way I think about like the insecure attachment types, the anxious, ambivalent, right?
Anxious, yeah.
They really fear the loss of the relationship, so they cling on to it, right? Whereas like an anxious avoidant type, they might fear the connection altogether. It's like vulnerability is scary, commitment is scary. I'm just going to avoid that altogether. The disorganized fearful is like they want the connection, but they also fear it at the same time. That's why it's so confusing and like conflicting, is because like I really want it, but I also don't have any confidence that you're going to be the person that I want you to be, or that I thought you were going to be, or the person that I need. I don't really believe that. And I think it is rooted in low self-esteem. Like, I'm really into you. I love you. I'm crazy about you. We have this connection, but there's no way that you would actually be into me. So I'm going to sabotage this, right? Like, it's very, very confusing. Have you ever seen Good Will Hunting?
Long time ago, girl. Like, long time ago.
Yeah. There's a scene in there where, like, so Will, in the beginning of the movie, it's been a while since I've seen it, but he like starts going to therapy and he's like making jokes out of it, and therapists are getting like annoyed with him because he's not taking it seriously. So he is like avoidant, right? In the like first part of the movie, he's like avoiding any kind of vulnerability, which is why he's like, therapy is a fucking joke. I don't want to be here. Well, he meets this woman and they really hit it off, and it seems like a promising relationship. Like, he really likes her, she really likes him. And the closer that they get, they have this conversation where she's like, I think it's something like she was going to move, and then now she's saying like, maybe I want to stay here closer to you, or maybe you can come visit me. And it freaks him out because deep down he's like, he thinks like there's no fucking way this girl is really into me. I want to be with her. I don't trust that she wants to be with me. So she mentions this, like, maybe I'll stay closer to you, maybe you can come visit me. And he just explodes. He's like, I don't remember exactly what he said in the movie, but it was basically like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, no, this isn't going to work. Like, you're going to go back home and you're going to hook up with some guys at your school and you're going to forget about me and you think you're stringing me along. Like, he just loses it. And she's thinking, where is this coming from? So again, it's that disorganized, like, I want this so bad, but you're never going to be the person that I need you to be because I am not really worth it.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's very, very complex.
Okay. And then on the opposite of the spectrum from the anxious attachment is the avoidant, insecure avoidant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if these signs sound familiar, guys, you might be of this. And this was my 20s, my slut phase. This literally was me. Okay. So they have a sense of security in themselves and overly secure, which this happened for me because I was finally comfortable with being out. I knew who I was. I was getting more in the clothing I wanted to. So I did. I was very confident around this time. They don't trust other people, only themselves. If you don't feel safe in a relationship, like you're like, it feels almost confining.
Mm-hmm.
If someone like, basically the thought of someone taking care of you might feel inappropriate or even threatening because you like to feel independent. You like that sense of freedom. And man, when I heard that phrase yesterday, I was like, wow, that sums up exactly what I was feeling anytime, because I liked having a relationship. I always have. I've always enjoyed having a long-term relationship, but I've never enjoyed until recently being invested in that relationship. There was always a part of me that had like one foot out of the door.
Yeah. Yeah, it's classic, like someone who is really avoidant or like that closeness in a relationship is like, ugh, no. It could be something as simple as like, I've heard clients say stuff like this, like I don't know, they were sick and their partner brought them soup. And it would be like, what are they thinking? Coming to my house and like bringing me stuff, like weird, it could be something so simple. And I'm like, that's what people do in relationships, but that can feel like, whoa, way too close because I don't need you to take care of me. Exactly. I can take care of myself. I didn't ask you to come over here and give me soup. I can take care of myself.
I'm a strong, independent woman. Yes. I don't need nobody.
Yes, when really someone's wanting to take care of you. Yes, how dare they?
Oh man, it took me a long time to be okay with being taken care of.
Yeah.
Like it took a moment. It took a lot of people. But yeah, it again feel threatening. That was something. Wow. But yeah. So and if you're avoiding attachment, you also view other people as clingy or needy.
Yes.
Right. Because you wonder, you're like, well, why aren't they more independent? Why can't they take care of their own needs like I take care of mine, right?
Yeah.
Or like the closer they get, the more you could be turned off by their needs or their vulnerabilities. It could totally be a turn off because you're like, oh, they're not as independent as I thought. They're too clingy.
In our domestic violence episode, remember I talked about like interdependence. So there's like the pendulum of like codependent, and then there's like the hyper independence and that middle ground of like interdependence. That's almost kind of attachment, right? Like the hyper independence is like avoidant, codependency is like really anxious or disorganized, and that interdependence is like secure, stable. We both need each other, but we're okay if we're on our. It's like that mix, right? So it very much relates to attachment too.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So yeah, and the more for avoidant, if you view attachment itself as a threat to your own security, or if you tend to prefer flings or relationships without commitment, these things can be, if basically you're saying, I don't need anyone else, which, hi, I've been that person. You could be on the avoidant attachment category. All right.
Yeah. Just as kind of I know we're going to segue into like what does this mean for sex and like who we are as a sexual person, but I just have these are very quick tips of what to do depending on your attachment style and wherever you are at this point in life. But for the anxious ambivalent type, or someone that does like cling on to relationships and really feels that abandonment when their partner does leave the house. And by the way, someone who is like really like anxious to an extreme, it can feel like dying when their partner leaves them and they get really scared, or the relationship is threatened, or it can really feel that overwhelming.
Oh, after my first heartbreak. It
was
physically painful.
I
physically felt pain.
Yeah. So someone who is, if you're in a relationship and that's your attachment style, and by the way, these are only if you want to change them, right? I have to point that out. Like, don't take this as me saying you need to change. I don't know. But like, if it's something you want to work on, a tip that you can do if you're that anxious ambivalent type is to cultivate a hobby or a skill on your own that you can do when you're not near your partner, right? Like if your partner doesn't want to spend 24/7 with you, let's say that they go golfing on Saturday and them not being around on Saturday is like really painful to you because you're like, all I want to do is be with that person. Like, what do I do now? A nice way to build some strength there is to come up with something that you can do on your own.
A hobby, yeah.
Yeah, a hobby, just something that you can feel good and proud of on your own, right? If you're the avoidant type, something small that you can do. This is like an example of how to really build some vulnerability in your life if that's what you want to do. But it would be to tell someone, I'm saying your partner, but if you're single, it could be like a family member, friend, whoever. Tell them how you feel about them while you're looking at them.
Oh, that's hard.
That's really hard.
Okay.
That's really hard, right? And then the disorganized, fearful type, it's hard to say what a quick tip would be to work on that attachment type because it's really complex. If you can go to therapy for that with someone who knows a lot about attachment, I would do that because sometimes if you can put the pieces together of like how your life growing up has impacted you as an adult and your relationships now, putting the pieces of that puzzle together can kind of give you some clarity on, okay, what are my steps to like healing from the trauma that I've been through? Like, what does that mean for my life? And so seeing a professional can really help. Oh yeah, and I was going to go over some critiques of attachment theory. The first is just cultural implications. Like, what is secure for us is not going to be the same as security in every culture.
Makes sense, yeah.
So, you know, like as a therapist and for any other therapists out there, it's just something to be mindful of, right? Because I've not really run into this issue, but if I had someone from a culture that I was unfamiliar with and I was trying to fit them into this like secure box that is not in alignment with their culture, you have to be really cautious of that, right? Because they know more about their culture. And there's also, like, in this theory, there's not a lot of consideration of, like, individual differences versus attachment. And so that gets really complex, too. So, like, let's say we're labeling someone avoidant, but maybe their choice in life is, like, I don't ever want to be in a relationship. That could be their individual choice, their preference, their tolerance. It's not always attachment. So it's just something to be mindful of, right? And then also, I added this one just for myself, but something that isn't really considered here is through the lens of like neurodivergent kids, right?
Oh, yeah, okay.
If we're talking about like an autistic kiddo, I mean, if the child like avoids their mom when they come back in the room, is that really an attachment issue or is it like neurodivergence, right? I don't really know. I don't know how you would like categorize or go into that, but there's not any implications for that either. So even in the suggestion I gave of like, if you're avoiding, like, tell someone how you feel and look at them. You know, some neurodivergent people are really uncomfortable with eye contact, and maybe that's not really an issue, right? Like, that you don't need to fix that maybe. So just to throw that out there.
So basically you're saying the attachment theories, the categories are, not only are they situational and kind of fluid, but it also depends on like your background, your culture, your history, the way.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider when talking about attachment. So it's not very simple. You know, even for me, like I use attachment theory in a lot of my work. There's still some cases where I get tripped up on it, right? Because I'm like, do I help this client from an attachment lens or is it something else? Right? It's really hard to say. And so it's not black and white, that's for sure.
Do you, just a quick tangent question, do you relate to any of the attachment styles more than the other? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm secure now, but I have not always been. I would say I was definitely disorganized and fearful for a long time, anxious for a long time, but also, oddly enough, avoidant for a long time. So, like a little bit about my background. I did grow up in a traumatic household. You know, I had an alcoholic father who was abusive, and not physically, but like in every other way, towards my mom, towards me, and my brother. And so the way I grew up, I say disorganized because there were some good times and there were some times of like really horrible times, even if I would be doing the same thing, right? Oh, yeah. And so it was very, very confusing. And it also would depend on like how much my dad had been drinking or not. If he was sober, it was one story. If he was drunk, it was another story. Because he's an angry drunk, but he's also just like an angry person in general. So very, very confusing. And I never like knew what to do. And I think I was probably just stressed a lot as a kid. And that's another thing I was going to say is that when a child is like growing up in a really like inconsistent or traumatic way, they're always under stress. And it can easily turn into toxic stress because whenever we're stressed, our body produces adrenaline and cortisol. Yeah. Which is necessary. Like in some situations, we need to be put on alert, right? Like someone's chasing after me. I need to be stressed for me to like run faster and all that. But when your body is always producing that because you're in this toxic stress, it negatively impacts the development of their brain and their immune system too. So when you get older, like the data shows someone who grew up with a lot of trauma and has like this insecure attachment is at more risk of being sick as an adult than like someone who didn't have that kind of background. So I definitely was like always under stress. And so, yeah, when I started dating or like became old enough to start dating, I had a boyfriend in high school who I just think I was like desperate for a relationship. Like I just thought no one is ever going to like me. No one is ever going to find me attractive. So this guy likes me, like that's it for me, you know?
Were you more nerdy in high school, or what was your, I guess, did you have
yeah, I was definitely more nerdy. I was in band, and I was like kind of an emo kid for a long time. Okay. And so I had friends, but I definitely wasn't popular by any means.
You weren't the head cheerleader?
No. Okay. No, nothing like that. More the nerdy kid. And I also just didn't like how I looked, and I just assumed everyone thought I was unattractive. I just kind of went through all that. And so then I had like that boyfriend. And then after we broke up when I was in college, I really became like even more anxious. Like I still had the issue of like, no one is going to like me. So I was just desperate for male attention, but I was avoidant in the way of like, and again, this gets into sex, which we're going to get into, but I definitely used sex as a source of validation. If someone has sex with me, that means I'm attractive. I'm desirable enough. But if you want to get in a relationship with me, that would make me the full stop. I would be like, I would view people as like clingy, like relatively easily.
Okay.
So it was like, no. So I had a period of like a lot of sexual partners. And again, no judgment of casual sex. But if I look back, I was doing that because I really had some attachment issues that I had not worked out. And so I had to kind of work out, like, again, disorganized, wanting a relationship, especially wanting validation. But then when the opportunity would present itself beyond sex, I would be like, because I would have to be vulnerable back with them. And it was like, no, I don't want to do that. Nope, no way. So that's kind of my attachment history, right? And I'm married now, as you know, and feel pretty secure now, but it took me a long time to get there.
Girl, I feel that all day. But yeah, no, I'm really excited to go towards the how this impacts your sex life, because that's one thing I did no research on because I wanted to come in kind of learning.
Yeah. So I'll start with secure, and I think you kind of spoke this already, but how secure attachment translates to sex and intimacy is a secure state of mind. It really allows for ease regarding sexual intimacy. And so they can respond to a partner's sexual preference without compromising theirs, right? Like that's a big deal. Like I feel like boundaries are really strong. They have a confident approach to sexuality. They're totally fine saying what their own wants and desires are. And that kind of confidence allows for exploration and kind of fosters longevity in a relationship and in a sexual relationship. And so a secure sense of self really lets you express your emotions with others and give opportunity for an emotional bond. Right.
So these are the people who pretty much can talk about sex pretty easily with their partner. And there's like no shame or anything that comes out of that. As far as I think it's more like even if there is some shame or embarrassment or whatever, they can own it, right? Okay. They can own it. Like, that I don't know how I feel about myself in that regard. Or like, here's what I like, but I'm, it makes me doubt myself or whatever, right? Like they're not perfect, but there's this confidence of like I can just own it and say it. And I really like being able to respond to a partner's preferences without compromising their own. That is a really big piece because anxious people it can go either way. They can be really rigid with sex, or they can like bend over backwards to do whatever their partner wants because they don't want to lose their relationship. Right? So you get into like kind of an icky boundary situation. I feel like secure people are pretty good at being like, as an example, if my partner had a certain kink, like, I wouldn't judge them. I'd be like, cool, like, what do you get out of that? How does that make you feel? Maybe I'm open to trying it, but let's say I'm ultimately not. I'm also okay being like, it's not really my jam, right? Like, I don't really want to do that. Because I have this, again, security of like, I don't think they're going to leave me if I don't want to do that. And if they do, there's not a whole lot I can do about it. Like, that would suck, but I'm going to be okay. At least I was honest. Whereas, anxious people kind of feel differently about that. One other thing I was going to say about secure attachment, because when I said like that security really allows for exploration, I just want to clarify how I define exploration, because
I think exploration, like when someone says sexual exploration, I think what comes to mind is like wild and fun and new and whatever, right? Yes, it can be that. But to me, exploration means I'm open to trying something, and it's also okay if I decide I don't like that thing. Exploration comes with a risk, right? Like, it doesn't mean we're going to love everything that we try. Exploration could also be, we tried it, it wasn't really for me. For me personally, that's how anal sex is. I've tried it before. It's not for me. I'm not interested, but I was open to trying it. And so if someone is open to exploration, don't push them down if they ultimately decide that that's not their thing. They tried it, right? Yeah. Like, that's all you can do. So I just wanted to clarify how I define that. So moving on to the anxious ambivalent type, the fear of rejection can really motivate them to use sex as a way to like hold on to their relationship. So it's manipulative in a way. And I'm not saying every anxious person is manipulative, but what I'm saying is like, again, let's say I'm anxious and I have a huge lack of boundaries and I bend over backwards to do everything my partner wants. It's manipulative in the way that like people pleasing is manipulative. I don't think it comes with ill intent. Okay. But it's like, I'm not being honest. I'm not coming to the table honestly. I bend over backwards. I do all the things you want to do. But my honest self is saying, I really don't even want to do half of this. Like, imagine how my partner is going to feel if I let that go on for, let's say, 5 years. 5 years down the road, I come out and I say, I actually don't want to do any of this stuff anymore, and I've actually never wanted to do it. Oh, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that sucks. When you're on the receiving end of that, it's like, why wouldn't you have told me that, right? Because now I thought this is how we were, and now it feels like I've kind of been lied to. I'm not saying manipulative in the way of, like, these are awful people, but there is an element of it, right? That's there. And so they kind of use, sex to gain reassurance and negate the possibility for rejection or abandonment. They can have, really like poor boundaries, like I said. And a lot of times their needs and desires are more for their partner than it is for themselves. Because again, they're afraid to lose their relationship. So sex can be very like, I want to have sex because I want to please them because that'll ensure that they stay with me. Yeah, instead of it being about, again, that honest conversation of like, but here's what I like and I wish that you would do that to me. Whatever it is. Yeah.
No, I can see this because I've seen this in my own experiences of a partner who and it took me a while to catch it too, but they knew about my high sex drive and their sex drive wasn't at the same level. And it wasn't until a long time in where that I realized, or that they told me that they just kind of had sex with me just because they knew I wanted to. So that was, and I remember how hurtful it was for me in the receiving end. It was like, well, I thought this was something that you enjoyed as well.
Yeah, it's a real bummer when that's the conversation. And I've seen it happen, with my clients. They're having these honest conversations for the first time, and sometimes it's like,
but they just felt pressure to please because they wanted to keep me. So
yes, yeah. And that like whenever, like for an anxious person, if sex is all about pleasing their partner, because that's gonna ensure them, it's like a sense of security that the relationship will stay, right? Whenever you avoid your own needs and preferences in your sexual relationship, it can result in a lower libido because how can sex really be enjoyable in that way? Right? It's not really like worth having because nothing that you want is coming from it, but you're also not saying any of that.
It kind of ties into the sexual anxiety.
It does. Yeah, okay. It can create sexual anxiety for sure. Yeah. And then moving on to the anxious avoidant type. So individuals who have this type are less likely to connect on an intimate level. And this is where it's important to point out that sex and intimacy are different. Like, sex can be intimate, but intimacy is not always sex, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Like, sex can be intimate. It isn't always. And for an avoidant person, and I definitely went through this phase of my life where sex is really fun, and I kept it casual because casual is not intimate at all for me. Or it wasn't. I don't think it is for a lot of people. It was not for me. So I got to have the fun without any of the intimacy.
Yes. without any of the risk or the baggage or the drama.
Yep. And so you'll see, you know, with this type, like after a certain, like sex tends to happen very quickly. And after a certain point, when let's say feelings are involved, you'll see them pull away. And I've been that person, and I've also been on the receiving end of that, and it's really hurtful. It's so hurtful, right? Like I'm having sex with someone, I'm starting to like them, and I can just feel them pulling all the way back. They suddenly have no more time for you. They don't want to go out with you. They're too busy.
They're leaving your messages on read.
Yes, exactly. Leaving you on read. They're not coming over even to have sex anymore. It just feels like oof, you know. And so, sex is more of it's just more of a transactional experience. Like we're having sex, we're having pleasure, but nothing else. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. And I have seen this happen. I'm thinking of a particular case that I've had, and this is a really tough one to overcome. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's like too late. But I've seen it happen where, sex is really great. And like, let's say a couple comes to see me and they're married. Sex was really great in the beginning. But then once the commitment set in, sex stopped happening. And I had a couple that went like years without sex.
Wow. Okay.
And the person I'm thinking about was so avoidant that the therapy, it was just unsuccessful. Because there was no way to get in with this person. It was like, they did not want to talk about emotions. They did not want to talk about attachment. They did not want to ever admit that there was like some connection here. They didn't want to ever say why they weren't having, like, you couldn't get it in. It was like so avoidant. And so those are the cases that are really hard.
I was about to ask you that.
Avoidant clients are really, they make for tough clients. And I don't say that to discourage anyone from coming to therapy if you are avoidant, but there has to be some level of like, can I open the door even a tiny bit? If there's not that, it's like, how do you ever get in to go anywhere with that?
Gotcha.
You know, sometimes it's just impossible. So,
well, I found with the avoidant attachment, it and again, this is how I used to view vulnerability a long time ago, but it felt like vulnerability equals weakness, right?
And
that's actually how I used to think of vulnerability for the longest time. So I could see.
Yeah, vulnerability is a weakness. And then, you know, that kind of leads me to this last one, like the disorganized attachment. Because again, the disorganized person is a mix of like, I really want the connection, but I'm also terrified of the connection, right? Like I want both. And for the disorganized person, vulnerability equals ultimate pain. That's kind of what trauma is, right? Like if your relationship with your caregiver, let's say it's a parent, was inherently traumatic pretty much your whole life. Like any vulnerability you showed put you in a traumatic place, right? And so it's the ultimate pain, even though they really want that. So with the disorganized type regarding sex, right? They're similar to the anxious type in the way of having poor boundaries, compromising their own wants and desires to protect the relationship. But then if sex does become emotional, and that's what I mean by like sex can be intimate. If sex is intimate, it's not casual. It's like that deep, like, this is the person that I love and they love me and there's emotion involved. That can be overwhelming and confusing. It can be very destabilizing and make them want to back out, even though that's what they really want, right? Super confusing. So I can go either way.
Oh man, you are describing one of my exes, like to a T, where it was really hard on the receiving end. Actually, it was one of my first heartbreaks. But yeah, where it seemed like at first everything was easy. Everything happened really fast.
Yeah.
You know, I love yous were exchanged really fast. You know, it got really, but it seemed like the more I leaned into the relationship, the more they left.
Yep.
And so this whole, like, the whole view of, you know, not only can they not trust themselves, they can't also trust others. I felt that, like, really hardcore, to where they were too scared to even try.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Too scared to even try. That's a perfect summary of it. Okay. Man, it's hard to be in. So if any of you listening are any of these types, I mean, I'm curious to see like what resonates with you. And I'm linking a bit here, but I'm going back to the episode we did on domestic violence. Okay. I think people who are abusive for sure have an insecure attachment in some way. And so as we're talking about all of this, and this always is something I'm thinking as a therapist, like as I'm trying to understand someone, right? Like I have a client or whoever, I'm trying to understand them and put the pieces together of their attachment with them. They can also still be an abusive partner. And so I'm just kind of making note of that. Like if you're with someone and you're trying to come from this like empathetic, understanding place, right? But they are also abusive. And I'm thinking of the disorganized specifically. Really it could be with any of these, to be quite honest, but like the disorganized or the anxious, like if there's ever a lot of lashing out and insults thrown and things thrown around the room, or they do hit you in a state of like really freaking out, you can simultaneously like try to understand that they definitely have an insecure attachment, and I have a lot of empathy for that. But remember that your safety still comes first too, right? True. Like you can leave a relationship, even if you have empathy for them and they're coming from a place of trauma and they're coming from a place of like really high anxiety, but they're dangerous to you. You can understand it, and you also can decide like I can't do that anymore. No, my safety comes first. Yeah. So that's always tough, because people can do some awful things out of this like fear of losing a relationship or fear of rejection, and they're scared, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay in a relationship with them. Because any like going from childhood to adult attachment, in childhood, we develop skills that are adaptive, that are like survival. And what ends up happening is we become adults and we keep using those same skills. Now they're maladaptive because we're in a different environment. We're in a different relationship. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's how I like to think of it. I'll use avoidant as an example. I mean, if you grew up and anytime you expressed emotion, you were yelled at, and your coping skill, your mechanism was, I'm just not going to express that anymore because that's survival. Like, I don't want to get yelled at every day for my whole life, so I'm not going to do that anymore. Well, whenever you're in an adult relationship, that skill isn't really adaptable anymore because you're probably with the partner who's like, but I want you to tell me what you're thinking. Yeah, that's the example I think of. Okay.
I like that. Mm-hmm. Wow. So guys, your parents have a lot to do with your sex life, just so you know.
Well, and last thing I'll say about that I meant to say earlier is that like sometimes, you do just grow up like in a shitty childhood and you have abusive parents and parents that have substance abuse issues, and all that can be true. Attachment is also impacted even when it's not your parents' fault. I think about like when a parent passes away. Like one of the video I've seen on attachment, the example was like a family of 6. It was like the 2 parents and the 4 kids, and one of the parents passes away. So now suddenly mom is like a single mom and is like having to work 3 jobs to make ends meet. There's just going to come an element of like, she's not going to be able to be there for all of their needs like she was at one point. And so like when we're talking about like the way we grew up and our parents' ability and time and energy, we're also talking about like socioeconomic status and like poverty. And when you're kind of like we said in the domestic violence episode, people who are in poverty are more likely to abuse or be like victims of abuse because of all the stress. Oh, yeah. That to me is attachment. If you're in poverty and your parents are not able to be home, even if they want to, they've got to make ends meet. There's going to be a lot of time where your needs aren't met, and it can develop in...
latchkey kids. I can see an insane amount of either disorganized or insecure attachment from latchkey kids for sure. Yep. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So we hope y'all enjoyed this one. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but this was a pretty good overview, I think. Oh, I learned a lot. This was good. This was really good. So I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hey, guys, like and subscribe and let us know what you thought. I mean, did any of this resonate with you? Do you think that you fall into any of these categories? And what did you take away from this? Does any of this make sense? And what might you want to hear from us next time? So definitely let us know in the comments. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks again for tuning in. We are Sex Positivity Unfiltered. And remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.